Nobody imagined that a routine haircut would ignite a dispute that would ripple through an entire neighborhood. And by the time everything was over, the woman who made that fateful phone call would deeply regret ever picking up the phone. Emma stood quietly beside her father on the sidewalk, her small fingers wrapped around his hand. The afternoon sun reflected softly off her freshly shaved head. Only a week had passed since she began her medical treatments, and while she was still learning to accept the changes in her appearance, she carried herself with a quiet kind of courage. Her father, Daniel, never strayed far from her side. Calm and composed on the outside, he remained constantly watchful, ready to shield her from anything that might cause her pain. Most of the neighbors reacted kindly. Some offered gentle smiles. Others respectfully looked away, giving her privacy. But one neighbor reacted differently. Across the street stood Linda, a woman who had unofficially appointed herself the guardian of every HOA rule and neighborhood standard. She stared intensely at Emma, her eyes narrowing as though something about the scene bothered her deeply. Her shoulders stiffened, and an expression of disapproval settled across her face. Moments later, she was already reaching for her phone. "This isn't appropriate," she said sharply as she made the call. "There's a child here who appears neglected. Someone should come investigate." Emma had no idea what Linda was doing. Daniel understood immediately. As the faint sound of approaching sirens drifted through the neighborhood, it became obvious that this wasn't an innocent misunderstanding. It was something else entirely. Linda wasn't acting out of concern. She was trying to exert control, and she had just stepped over a line she didn't yet realize existed. A police cruiser slowly turned onto the street, its tires crunching against the pavement as it rolled toward them. Emma instinctively moved closer to her father, gripping his hand a little tighter. Daniel crouched beside her and spoke softly. "It's okay," he assured her. "You haven't done anything wrong." The patrol car stopped. 2 officers stepped out, both wearing neutral expressions as they assessed the situation. Before they could even approach, Linda hurried over to meet them. "I'm the one who called," she announced confidently, gesturing toward Emma and Daniel. "That child doesn't look right. Something seems wrong." The officers exchanged a brief glance before making their way across the street. "Sir," one officer said politely, "we just need to ask a few questions." Daniel simply nodded. There was no frustration in his voice, no hostility, just patience. Emma looked up at the officers. Her face filled more with confusion than fear. "I'm okay," she said quietly. Something about her response immediately changed the atmosphere. The officers softened slightly, recognizing that the situation might not be what had been reported. But Linda wasn't willing to back down. "She shouldn't look like that," Linda insisted. "People in the neighborhood are uncomfortable." Daniel slowly rose to his feet. His expression remained calm, but there was a noticeable shift behind his eyes. What Linda didn't realize was that the situation was about to take a direction she never anticipated. The atmosphere grew heavier, though nobody raised their voice. Carefully and deliberately, Daniel reached into his pocket. The officers watched attentively, but remained calm. A moment later, he withdrew a badge. There was nothing dramatic about it. No grand gesture. Just a simple display of truth. "I understand your concern," Daniel said quietly as he held it up, "but I'm also a member of this department." The silence that followed seemed louder than anything that had been said before. Both officers immediately recognized him. Their posture shifted. "Sir," one of them said respectfully, clearly surprised. "It's fine," Daniel replied. Linda, however, looked completely thrown off. First came confusion. Then came defensiveness. "That doesn't change anything," she argued quickly. "Rules are rules. Standards still matter." For the first time, Daniel looked directly at her. Not angrily, not aggressively, just with complete clarity. "My daughter is going through a difficult medical journey," he said calmly, "and she deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." Emma looked up at him, her small hand still wrapped around his. The officers understood the entire situation now. Linda did not, and that misunderstanding was about to cause her far more than a little embarrassment. The change in the atmosphere was impossible to miss. The same officers who had arrived cautiously now stood firmly beside Daniel, not because of his badge, but because they finally understood what was really happening. One officer turned toward Linda. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "there's no problem here." The confidence that had fueled Linda moments earlier began to crumble. Still, she tried to justify herself. "I was only trying to protect the neighborhood," she insisted. Daniel remained composed, but his words carried a quiet weight. "Protecting people doesn't mean judging them before you understand their situation," he replied. Emma stayed close to her father, listening silently. Her quiet bravery spoke louder than anyone else's words. By now, several neighbors had gathered nearby. They watched from a distance, saying little as they observed the unfolding scene. The narrative Linda had attempted to create was falling apart right in front of them, and for the first time, she seemed to realize that she may have made a serious mistake. The tension never erupted into a shouting match. Instead, it slowly dissolved into an uncomfortable silence. Linda took a step back. Her voice was noticeably softer. "I didn't know," she admitted. Daniel gave a slight nod. "That's exactly the problem," he answered. The officers wrapped up their visit and prepared to leave, their work clearly finished. Yet the moment lingered. Emma glanced at the neighbors who had gathered, then looked back toward her father. She never said a word. She didn't need to. Her courage had already spoken for her, and everyone present had heard it clearly. Over the following days, the story quietly spread throughout the community, not as gossip, as a lesson. Neighbors began greeting Emma differently, more warmly, more thoughtfully. People smiled more often. Conversations became kinder. As for Linda, she kept her distance, not because she was angry, because she had been forced to confront a difficult realization. Sometimes the most important lessons don't come from winning an argument. They come from recognizing something that should have been obvious from the very beginning. Eventually, peace returned to the neighborhood, but it wasn't the same peace that had existed before. It felt deeper, more thoughtful, more compassionate. One afternoon, Daniel once again stood beside Emma beneath the warm sunlight. The light touched her face as she smiled softly, her strength shining brighter than any judgment ever could. What had started with assumptions and criticism had become something entirely different. A reminder that empathy matters. A reminder that quick judgments can cause real harm. And a reminder that understanding someone's story is always more important than assuming you already know it. That was a remarkable ending to this unforgettable HOA conflict. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support helps the channel continue bringing you more stories like this.